and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome everyone to this very, very special episode of Irreverend with me, Jamie Franklin, and I'm delighted to say today that I am joined by Nick Dixon. Now, this is a special episode, not least because we've got you, Nick, but also because you're going to be releasing this on your podcast as well, which is called The Current Thing. Do you want to just say something like that as well as saying hello, but to also contextualise things for your listeners?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me again. Great to be back. Yeah, I'll probably release this on my podcast channel, The Current Thing, or maybe on nickdixon.net, which is my website and Substack. Not sure exactly where it'll go yet, but if we're going to do this, we may as well double up, right? And you said that's okay, because we weren't sure if I was going to interview you or you interview me, but we went with you in the end. And that's what we've gone with.
I love it when I love killing two birds with one stone. I just think that makes me happy in life. And just in case people are watching the video, I'm awfully sorry because I realised I was chewing a piece of gum and I've just removed it as subtly from my mouth as I possibly could. But it is gone now and it will not reappear in this episode. But yeah, two birds with one stone, Nick. I just wanted to give a couple of quick retractiones or apologias, if that's the right word, from the Irreverend episode last week, because and this will be a good way of getting into some of the stuff we're going to talk about, because when Daniel and I were talking about, I don't really know what to call them, the riots or whatever you want to call them last week, we were just reacting to things, as they were happening, and sometimes one hasn't thought these things through, 100%. Now, these aren't, what I'm about to say, it's not like I'm changing my position on anything, but there's a couple of things. Firstly, there was just a factual error. I was going through kind of list of things that are, routinely not mentioned by the media. And one of the things I was talking about was the number of young girls or young women who were abused, raped, abducted by Rotherham grooming gangs. And it was one of a number of things I was talking about. And I said the figure 14,000 when I obviously meant 1,400. That's the number that was quoted in the official report. So that was an error in terms of the actual numbers. It's just a factual error. The other thing, and this might be a good point of conversation actually, Nick, is we were talking about, obviously the fact that the mainstream media fell into lockstep and came out with this narrative, which is just about, these are just sort of groups, large swathes of latent white British racists who just were, took the Southport stabbing as an opportunity to go crazy and start trashing things and committing racist vandalism and abuse and so on and so forth. And one of the points I was making, which in many ways is an obvious point to make, is that the media hardly mentioned the fact that there were other gangs going around. These weren't counter protesters, but these were other gangs who were smashing up shops and pubs and assaulting people. And thanks to Elon Musk, we can actually watch these things on Twitter, and we don't just have to rely on the deceitful mainstream media to tell us what reality is. And to be honest with you, as I said, I was reacting to this stuff at the time. And so I decided to call these people, or these groups, Asian gangs. And a couple of people have said to me subsequently, that's not actually the right terminology to use, because it's so vague and it sort of implicates, Chinese people or Korean people or people who live in Hong Kong or whatever. It's not actually right. We know that these gangs are actually Islamic gangs, and we should use the appropriate and specific language. Now, obviously, this is not to say that all Muslims are implicated by using that kind of language any more than it would be to say that all British or all white people are implicated if you say that these are British gangs or gangs of white people who are going around. I'm not going around smashing things up. My family aren't, but I could still call them, white people who are doing this. In the same way, I don't think it's inappropriate to call the so-called counter-protesters Islamic. And I think I just used the word Asian because it felt a little bit safe, but I think it's actually appropriate to call them Islamic gangs. And so I just wanted to say that right at the beginning. But I don't know, Nick, what do you think about that issue? What's your sort of view on it?
Well, I'll go through everything you said. I mean, number one, what to call it. There's quite a funny thing. I probably shouldn't share this, but hey, let's go for it. There was a thing at GB News not to call it the Summer of Violence, because then it would sound like we were predicting violence that may not even happen, and we wouldn't want to be sort of encouraging it. I said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll call it the summer of justice," which I thought, can you imagine if I said that? I just thought that was so funny, but not something I would say on a podcast. Obviously, I'm doing the Trump. I would never say it.
We never say this.
But or the Elon Musk when he said, I'm tempted to share this meme, but I never would." Did you see that? We can't quote it on a Christian podcast, but the Tropic Thunder meme, you can look it up in response to the EU. It was very rude. And then when you talk about Rotherham, I think you can be forgiven for saying 14,000 by mistake when it was 1,400. Still in this absurd number, and it was over 16 years, and that's just one of many towns. So by the time you clock all the people affected, I wouldn't be surprised if it is 14,000. I mean, it's so horrific. You could certainly be forgiven for that. And then that's interesting about the gangs. I think you're referring to our communities, aren't you, Jamie? That's a new phrase, because there's these relatively subtle phrases that the normal person with a life, unlike me, might not be ready for. But most people are smart, and they do catch on very quick that now when people say communities or our communities, they mean some communities. They mean not British, sort of, whatever you want to call them, native people, indigenous, whatever word we're using now that's going to get us in trouble. They mean certain immigrants and Muslims. That's our communities. So that's though, and in a way, it's accurate, because those are Labour's communities, and they hate the rest of us. So, and when you say Asian gangs, again, you can be forgiven because that's been used so much by the media. Even the BBC, I noticed, admitted there were these Asian gangs, quote, and at a point when Starmer couldn't admit it. So it's shocking that even he couldn't admit there was any problem, but the BBC could have a report, and did, saying that 250 to 300 Asian members of an Asian gang charged the police and were violent and were chanting Allahu Akbar very aggressively. And I thought, that's funny.
As Asians,
yeah. Why were some disgruntled Thai restaurant owners shouting Allahu Akbar? I mean, so it's exactly what you say. It's like, hang on, poor old Asians. It's not a Chinese kid on a scholarship doing it. It's like, it's so unfair. But that's the term that the BBC have gone with. Like, they were Asian gangs. Like, oh, okay, they seem quite angry, these Asian gangs. And they were chanting Allah Akbar. Ah, those Asian gangs. So yeah, Asian men, or whatever they're calling it. Not even gangs, they say Asian men, don't they? So you've tried to be maybe too PC there, Jay. But luckily now I'm on the podcast. There's no worry of that happening.
Yeah. But I mean, you understand the dilemma it puts you in is that if you actually use specific language, then immediately people accuse you of being Islamophobic or being racist or whatever it might be. But the point I'm making is that when you actually apply that to any other situation, particularly if it's to, say, white British people, nobody says, if you say, well, a gang of white men are doing X, Y, and Z, nobody says, oh, you're being racist because you're implicating white men in doing. Or if you were to say a gang of Christians, I mean, not
all Christians, and it's just like, no one said all. Shut up.
So it's like the policing of language, isn't it? In order to, it's in order that people aren't actually able to speak and actually ultimately think freely. I think that's one of Orwell's insights, isn't it? That if you control language, then you can control the way people think. So if you can't even speak the words, you can't think the thought, and then you can't actually realize that this is. These aren't just generic Asian people. I mean, Asia is a very large continent with all sorts of different people on it. This is actually, these are people who are Islamic, Muslims, as you say, they're chanting Allahu Akbar, they're carrying around Palestinian flags, they're beating up white people on purpose. And you can see this in real time on Twitter. And thank goodness we have Twitter. I mean, all the great and the good are going absolutely insane about Elon Musk's tweets.
Can I just say one thing about the other? Yeah, we basically said it, but I just wanted to add to it. This Asian men thing, it does reveal something else, which is that there are many other groups within the catch-all Asian men who are lower status groups. So we're used to thinking of it, okay, the white working class we can all see are a despised group by this Labour government. There's two-tier justice, there's two-tier policing, there's a two-tier society. That's absolutely clear. Only the most wretched partisan would deny it. But there are also lower tier Asian groups, like non-Muslim groups like Sikhs and Buddhists or whoever else it is. Whoever else is in that group, they're being thrown on the bus by Asian men, and that's the sacrifice the establishment's prepared to make, because those are lower status groups. They may not be quite as low as the lowly working class white man who's the ultimate scum, but they are still lower than the protected Muslim groups. So there's some sort of hierarchy there. no one caring about the offended Sikh or Hindu in that, because they're frankly whatever. No one, they're just trying to protect the aggressive Muslim. The society, the establishment's trying to protect the most criminal people in the society, and it's, of course, not all Muslims either. We have to always get that in, but they always want to. In anarcho tyranny, that's what you do, isn't it? And we have such a profound state of anarcho tyranny now, where the most criminal and worst people in the society are celebrated, and the best people are hated. So, or at least the law abiding are hated. So that's where we are. And there's many examples you could cite with, of course, which I'm sure we'll get into, the people getting 3 years in jail for memes versus out on 6 months because you killed someone with a machete, and you're out on 6 months for manslaughter, but you get 3 years and 2 months for reposting something a bit too edgy. So we've got this absurd level of anarcho tyranny, which I'm sure your listeners are familiar with, but it's just reached, I'd say, even more preposterous heights lately.
Yeah, well, let's do a kind of thought experiment and say we've got people who are listening to this maybe, and they haven't really listened to this podcast or your podcast or whatever, and they're mainly familiar with the mainstream narrative on these riots and everything like that. I mean, where would you start? Where would you start unpicking this? Because the narrative which came out, I mean, it really reminded me of COVID, to be honest with you. When this whole stuff started happening, it was like there was a preset list of facts that had to be, or facts, or things which are ostensibly facts, which had to be articulated in every mainstream broadcast. I kind of said some of them earlier, but these people are racist, they are thugs, they are not, and a lot of the time it was a kind of straw manning of their concerns, if their concerns were actually mentioned. So the small boats thing was mentioned as the principal reason that these people were upset. What else? That misinformation on Twitter had fueled this. There was, it was almost like no debate. It was just straight away, it's Twitter's fault. It's online misinformation that's stirring up hatred. And therefore there was immediately a question over whether we need more online censorship, and so on and so forth. So there was this kind of narrative which just suddenly appeared. And as you say, this language which suddenly appeared as well. The word communities was part of it. Of course, the other word that got bandied around immediately was the word far right. Other words, which were things like counter protesters. I'm trying to think of some of the other words, but these kind of words that were just immediately out there, and these are all euphemistic words which don't actually describe what was actually going on. So anyway, let's say that that's what people were familiar with. Where would you start unpicking that? Why are you so excised about this response from Starmer and the mainstream media? Where would you start there?
Okay, there's loads of places you could start. I mean, I'll just give you, just on this sort of injustice sense, I'll just give you a couple of facts. That there's this meme going around, oh, this guy got X amount of time for a post, and this person got X amount of time for rape and murder. And you sort of go, are these memes real? So I checked a few of them. And this lad called Tyler K, who is 26-year-old, he's got kids, he foolishly copy and pasted something from the wife of a Tory councillor, someone called Lucy Connolly, I believe. And she had posted something, and it was saying, I don't care what happens to these migrants, basically, and I don't care what you do to the hotels, set them on fire for all I care. Not a good thing to post. And he would copy pasted it in a very misguided attempt to prove that not everyone would be arrested, because he was aware, sort of dimly, that things were not right and things were two-tier, but he had the wrong tiers. It's like, no, they're certainly going to go for you, a sort of powerless white working class guy. And of course he absolutely did. And actually, I'm not sure as we record the latest, but that person who posted the original thing was going to get 18 months, it was rumored. But this Tyler kid got 3 years and 2 months, as I said, for posting this misguided, copy-pasting this misguided sentiment about, but it's not really incitement to say, I don't care what happens to them. He doesn't say, go there and do this. He just says, do this for all I care. And it's pasted from someone else. 127 followers or something, 9 likes. It's not good, but it's not a 3-year prison sentence. I'm sorry. And then you look into this meme that's going around about it. And there's a guy in Newcastle as part of this gang. And I used to live in Newcastle, but it was 20 years ago. I could tell you it was very different. There were far fewer machetes anyway. But there was this gang, and they're just raping teenage girls. And this guy, it's even said in the judgment that there was, I hate to say this, it's so disgusting, but there was penetration. So there was a rape of a 13-year-old. He got a 2-year suspended sentence and got something like 100, from memory, it's something like 120 or 180 or 128 hours of community service. And he got a suspended sentence for rape. And so you go, okay, that guy got community service versus 3 years in prison, not a suspended sentence, as far as I'm aware, for the young man posting the meme or the, the bad language, the misguided sentiment, and whatever you want to call it. Even if you want to call it incitement, it's still 3 years versus 2 years suspended. Then you got this guy Lawson Natty, also in Newcastle, killed this 14-year-old kid with a machete. There was two of them. One that went to prison for 9 years, but this Lawson Natty got 2 years and something. And out after 6 months for manslaughter, they write a letter to the mother of the 14-year-old kid that's been killed, saying, obviously this won't come as welcome news. Like, we appreciate this. Oh, really? It's just like, that is almost intolerable to even to think about. So that's a good place to start if you want to get an idea of the two-tier treatment of people and the absolutely undeniable two-tier treatment. Because I hardly have to say the people with the machetes and raping Newcastle. Well, maybe I do have to say, but they were not white working class people. Let's just say that. So there is this huge injustice. There's a complete failure to deal with the real problem, or let's say the root causes. And there's a complete failure to acknowledge people's pain in those initial press conferences. People were very angry because it was Starmer's total refusal to say something like, I know you're incredibly angry about this stabbing. I know you're incredibly frustrated that we seem to be less safe in the country. He could have even said, that's what happened on the 14 years of Tory rule. Fine,
yeah.
You've even got an opportunity there. But he didn't say anything about that. He said far-right thuggery, far-right scum. That was it.
Yeah.
Protect our communities. So it was like, oh, you're giving us nothing. Oh, why? You're giving us nothing. And then he doubled down again. I think there was one word in the first press conference. He said, and that's different from understandable anger or something like that. He said one word. He literally said the word understandable concerns, I think he said, was the only word. That was it. And then the second one, it was even worse and more doubling down. And you're like, all right, this guy's just a shark moving forward. I said, looking for another arrest. He's like, Crown Prosecution Service. Like he's not a leader. He can't give balance. He's incapable of it, and he won't do it. Since then, I've read up on. There's a Dan Hodges article, and even though he's an idiot, in the Mail Plus, it's quite interesting. There's a BBC in-depth article. This is a new section of the BBC that tries to be a bit better, and both of them hint at the fact that Labour are in no way equipped or willing to tackle the real problem. They actually hint that they are more aware of it than they've let on. So they say that they've been very concerned to not allow any kind of cause and effect between the violence and root causes, to not sort of give any credence to that cause and effect. So they just want to say it's evil, it's violence, let's shut it down. But in private, they know about the root causes, but it's whether they're able to tackle them. So the Mail Plus article admitted they know about this, but then they have three priorities. It said top of the list is social media, which is insane, because that's not the main problem. Then it goes, another problem is the alienation of the white working class. And I'm like, already that's second, which is weird. But then the Labour source in the piece was just saying things like, well, yes, we know there's a problem with these towns, but it's very hard to, he didn't say level up, but basically improve these towns even in 5 years, and we'd have to work cross departments. It's a big challenge. So you hear they're completely unaware. They won't admit the depth of the real problem, which is the scale of so-called legal immigration, the complete change of the country. They're basically saying, okay, these towns don't have a Waitrose. Can we fix that? Not really. Yeah. And then they admit there's a problem with the boats and illegal immigration, which they need to fix as well. So there's a private semi-acknowledgement of the problem, but you can already tell they're woefully ill-prepared and unwilling to fix it. So it's only going to get much, much worse, and they're just going to fall apart until someone else comes along to try and deal with it, if they have the cojones to deal with it. But sorry to go on at length. That's that's a bit of stuff for you.
That's great. So my friend, a friend of mine, was saying to me. So this is a Scottish guy who I think he is from Glasgow. He lives in Winchester now. He's got a completely different kind of social milieu and surrounding and so on. But he was saying to me, and he's older than me. He's just under 30 years older than me, and he was saying to me that basically he thinks that the actual issue around immigration, although obviously it's a massive issue, it's actually only one part of the issue, and the broader issue. And I'd be interested, especially given your background in a kind of northern working class community, growing up, whether you see this as well. He said, and obviously we're about the same age. You're a few years older than me, but anyway, so we're of a different generation. But he said that basically the problem is not just immigration; it's that from the late 70s onwards, the working class in this nation have had their communities destroyed, for obvious reasons, in the Thatcher era, but, in other ways as well. They've had their economic prospects blighted. And that's not just, from that period onwards, that's in recent years as well. Obviously, we've had, economic crashes and things like that. But even since COVID, I think, I feel it as a middle class person, with a middle class income, how much more expensive everything and unlivable things. I'm not sure if I'm using that word rightly, but how unlivable things have become, because just food is so much more expensive and all this kind of stuff. So they've had their culture, they've had their communities destroyed, they've had their economic prospects damaged. And then in that context, that pre-existing context from 1997 onwards, there have been unparalleled levels of immigration in this country, which have transformed and are in the process of transforming many of these areas into places which feel like the Middle East. You have had the systematic injustice, and this is one of the things that annoys me and upsets me so much about this, because the Church of England and everyone else was banging on about systemic injustice and systemic racism and things like that. It seems to me that white working class people are the most discriminated race in this nation of anyone, because their communities were ravaged by grooming gangs who were and continue to abduct young girls and kidnap them and keep them in their houses for days or even weeks and rape them, drug them, rape them, torture them. The things that you actually read when you look up about the grooming gangs, and some of which has been just admitted openly, like the Rotherham stuff, by the state, are absolutely horrendous. And add to that the fact that the police clearly have turned a blind eye to this and continue to do so. So you've got all of this stuff going on, and it's been going on for decades. And these people have no political representation. The Labour Party has turned their back on these people. The Labour Party and the left is supposed to represent the working class, but they've turned their back on them. And then this moment here, this is like the kind of zenith of this process, when you've got the leader of the Labour Party, who's now the Prime Minister, who's meant to represent the people, actually, as you say, doubling down on them, attacking their communities and othering them and treating them like they are the scum of the earth, and not in any way acknowledging the problem. And it's obvious what's going to happen. That is this just going to make the problem 1,000 times worse, because these people are absolutely incandescent with rage. They're hopeless. They've got no political representation. And what are you going to do if you just attack them like this? You're just going to pour fuel on the fire, and this problem is just going to get worse and worse and worse. So anyway, so that's a bit of a rant from me. So what do you think about that? That broader context kind of question? What's your perspective?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's interesting when you say it's not just immigration. Of course, there are lots of problems, and I compared it to the miners' strike in one tweet that did very well. But I said, some would say that was a war on the working people. Some would say it was something else. But this is a completely different level where Starmer just completely declared war on the entire working class. And that got so many likes. I was like, okay, people agree with that. So yeah, you've got these towns that have no money. I mean, my area was actually nice. I mean, some people were on council estates. I don't come from some tough working class area, actually. My dad came from a very poor background. My mum had slightly more money, but they were still in Lancashire. It wasn't massive. And I'm kind of state school, sort of normal, lower middle class. But
oh, sorry about that.
Well, I only say that because I don't want to sort of any stolen valor of, like, my dad was definitely working class. I'm sort of, whatever. Where I mean, I still used to sign on in biker, and there was no guidance and there was no sort of whatever, but it wasn't the level of some of these people. People are struggling to a much greater level, and they maybe more like my dad did, and they. Yeah, so there's a number of factors, there's economic factors and so on. I agree with that, made worse by immigration. And as you say, now the absolute scapegoating of the white working class. And why do Labour hate them so much? One reason I've heard, which is quite compelling, is that they're a powerless class who you say, oh, these people are powerless. Why do you hate them so much? Well, it's because of their powerlessness. They're not useful to them. They despise them. They think they're uneducated. They can't be utilized for political power like certain minority groups where you can say, oh, we're here for you. Vote for us. We've seen the sort of battle between Labour trying to get the Muslim vote and these independent candidates that almost beat people like Jess Phillips and Wes Streeting, who are just because we like Palestine, we hate the country, and there's a group percentage that will vote for we hate the UK, we hate Israel, we love Palestine. There's a large percentage vote for that now. So but the white working class are a useless group to them. They don't offer them anything. And a very interesting graph came out the other day. I don't know if you saw where your income dictated who you'd vote for. And these days I'm doing better because I've got this for now this TV job. So I almost qualify as a Labour voter because you see the income go up and up and up.
Wow.
And as it goes, it starts at the bottom, under 20,000, and then it's 30, like 20 to 30, 30 to 40. It goes up to 50, 60, over 70. And it's almost a perfect line in Labour, almost indirectly proportional, I suppose, between how much money you have and whether you vote. No, the more money you have, that's directly proportional. You'll vote Labour. And the reform line is a perfect line the opposite way. If you're under 20,000 a year, 17% voted reform, and it goes up and up to the 70 plus thousand bracket, 10%. So it sort of goes 17, 14. It's hard to describe, and I don't have it in front of me. But basically,
but what you mean is if you earn more money, you're more likely to vote for Labour.
Yes, it's a very long way of saying that.
Right,
and if you earn less, you're going to vote reform. And the Tory line tended towards the lower end, you'd vote Tory, but it wasn't a perfect line, but it was more in the kind of 30, 40, 50, you might vote Tory. But it was fascinating. Labour are now the party of the wealthier. So that is not a surprise to anyone. So of course, they don't care about the white working class on any level. They're not going to vote for them. They certainly won't vote for them after what he's done now. And they hate them on all levels. And as you say, they're the most disenfranchised. They're the least likely to go to university. Poor white boys are the least likely demographic to go to university. You only have to see an article like the one the other day saying that actually someone had won a case. A couple of people had won a case for being discriminated against for being white. And that's such a rare thing that you see it sometimes. You go, oh, but the norm is the systemic racism against white people, which, lefties would scoff at. But it's just completely obvious. I'm trying to find it now. It's from Steve Edgerton had this. Here we go. 3 white police officers were discriminated against because of their race. And this was in the Telegraph. A judge ruled that they were passed over for promotion in an anti-white racist decision where bosses chose an Asian instead to boost diversity. And this was in the police. And they actually won it. And someone has won before against Cheshire Police. But notice it carries on. You get these occasional wins. And but in a much larger systemic oppression, I mean, you are passed over for jobs. You will get a much more harsh prison sentence. You will be treated very differently on the street by the police. You will be treated differently in the rhetoric by the prime minister. I mean, there's no area where you won't be treated worse. So the funny thing about that is the thing that people aren't ready to, some people are ready to hear, because I put a tweet about this that got a lot of likes, so some people are ready to hear it. But this thing about two-tier, it's a useful phrase. What does it actually mean? It's racial oppression against a certain group. And we've had these systems before at their extremes of apartheid and Jim Crow and things like that. And people would say, well, that's an absurd comparison, Nick. But, some of that was like, we can drink from the same water fountain, but we won't be treated the same way.
Yeah.
And especially the more working class you are and the more white you are, you won't be treated the same way by any aspect of the system. So is that not a historical injustice? Of course it is. But no one wants to talk about it. And then people are embarrassed to talk about it. And that's one feature of it. When people are oppressing another group, initially, lots of people think it's great. You can go through any case in history where it doesn't start with everyone going, well, this is terrible. You're oppressing these people. It starts with them going, this is great. Here's why it's moral. Look at these graphs, and the whole nation gets behind it. And you can make certain historical comparisons. I won't, because you'll get in trouble. But there are many historical comparisons where you could say, actually, nations have oppressed an entire group, and they've done it gleefully, and they've done it with the support of the population, or a large chunk of the population, or people who just want an easy life. So I think we're on that kind of level. We're on the level where you can't even talk about it without being demonized. You're racist for even mentioning it, but that's part of the oppression. You see, you don't even have a voice. It's kind of like, to give just a sort of maybe silly historical example, but when America came and conquered the Native Americans, so-called, some people call them American Indians, it was done gleefully with we're destroying you, we're wiping you out, and it's great. It's manifest destiny, up yours, with your tomahawks, we win. It wasn't like, oh, guys, is this okay? That came a lot later when they're on the reservation. Then they get, an independent movie and someone writes a heartfelt piece in the New York Times. That's a lot later. We're now in the stage of the gleeful destruction and assault on this particular segment of the population, which is actually the native Brits, particularly the white working class ones.
Yeah, the sort of salt of the earth kind of indigenous people. In terms of just trying to make sense of this, again, if anyone's sort of cynical about this or looking on, they might say, well, why would Labour turn against, their own people for no reason? Surely they must have a point. And I'll just sort of throw out a couple of thoughts here, and see what you think about this. There does need to be some kind of explanation as to why the blob reacts like this when things happen, and why this kind of two-tier stuff is going on. Is it, do you think, to do with, well, I mean, part of me thinks that it's in the liberal regime, there always has to be a kind of a despised group. There always has to be some group that is perceived to be an enemy to progress. Otherwise, it would almost seem like there is no progress to be made. I remember hearing Douglas Murray talk about this when, around the time he released The Madness of Crowds, he spoke about St. George in retirement syndrome. Once St. George has slain the dragon, it's kind of like he has nothing else to do, so he has to go around looking for other dragons, even if they don't exist. And liberalism can be a bit like that. So I guess my sort of question is that what the working class are? Are they kind of the whipping boy of the liberal establishment? Are they the justification for the furtherance and the continuation of the liberal project? Or is it something more pernicious than that? Or I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you have any sort of thoughts in that direction?
Yeah, one thing that springs to mind was a couple of things. One is the simple practicalities of it, and one is the kind of Orwellian side. So on the Orwellian side, there was a transparent example the other day, I think you alluded to it, where the front pages all suddenly, I can't remember if you alluded to it before we started recording or not, but the front pages all suddenly unified that the far right had been crushed. And it was a COVID level moment. It was a complete absurdity. There was this idea of the 100 riots, 100, separate demonstrations that were never going to actually happen. And even Nick Lowell's from Hope Not Hate admitted it was a hoax. He didn't say he caused the hoax, but he said it was a hoax, but it was okay because the final outcome was good. And the outcome was that they got a load of so-called anti-racist people on the street with identical banners that they're given, and they were there in greater numbers than these alleged far-right people that were never going to be there. And therefore, this was a great victory. It was a photo opportunity. And all the papers of any alleged stripe, from the Express to the Guardian, went with this, far-right crushed image on their front page. Absolute absurdity. But it wasn't even good propaganda. It was so ludicrous that it was just like, it was like the regime. You could see the strings. You could, it was the Wizard of Oz. You could see the old bloke. It was just like, guys, come on, because we've seen it during COVID, and this was less slick than that. And as you alluded to as well, the press conference, the journalist questions were all completely fake from the start. It was like, no one said, what about the actual anger around these girls being killed? No one said, what about the underlying cause of immigration, Keir? What they said was, how can facial recognition be even better so we can crush these white working class people more efficiently? It was amazing. It was like, can we get the whole DNA on that and like just throw them in prison forever, like just from their face? These were like the kind of questions. Good question. I'll take that. It's like, this is absurd. It's Potemkin, to use Dominic Cummings' favorite phrase, just Potemkin nonsense. It was completely fake. And then the front pages were so transparently fake. It was absolutely ridiculous. It's like, okay, yes, the narrative you've gone with is anti-racist lefty legends defeat evil far right, and it's completely absurd on all levels. And we even see some people messing up their narrative, like that Ricky Jones, the Labour councillor who's been suspended, is under investigation for saying cut their throats. And the woman next to him, I don't know if she's had anything, but she was just laughing and clapping at it, which was so insane.
She was from Amnesty International. He was speaking.
No, that was the one behind.
Oh, okay.
The one behind was from Amnesty. And she can convincingly say that she didn't hear it because she actually is looking away when he says it. And she says she didn't hear it. And I actually can believe it because you look at it, it doesn't look like she did hear it. But the woman next to her is someone called Joe Cardwell, who's protested Farage and things before. She definitely heard it because you can see in her face.
And he's saying, just because you didn't say it, he's talking about the white gangs. He's saying we should cut their throats. And he literally makes a gesture across his throat, like
yeah. And he says the far right, but you still, even if it's the far right, you're going, okay, you want to cut people's stuff. So he's in trouble because that was so widely shared they couldn't get away with not doing something on that. But yeah, onto this group. One, it's Orwellian stuff. It's here's this fake group we have defeated. Aren't we amazing? We've
like
defeated
unifying against the enemy.
Yeah, the fake enemy. The other thing is the simple pragmatic concern that they sometimes quasi admit, which is you can't really police these things. So what they do is they police certain groups much more cautiously because they know those groups will kick off and get violent. It's because they know they're violent. So they have to claim our beautiful communities, and they have community leaders. And I'm sure you've heard this absurdity. Like you saw the policeman who, sorry if anyone knows all this stuff, and I'm just ranting, but you saw the policeman who was saying, we spoke to them and they said, no, there's not going to be anyone too bad here and we'll be okay. So we let them police it themselves. They're letting them police themselves. Yeah. Even though
it's important as well in the context there, it was said to the police officer and he accepted that many of them were carrying around swords and knives and things like that. And then he said, but they were policing themselves. So we let them get on.
And it turns out, one or two were bad eggs, but we let them police themselves. You let them police themselves. And then we all see the footage when it's the white people that they kettle them and they smash them in the face. And there was a brilliant report from GB News from I think it was a Northern Irish guy, and he just was on the ground going, look, here's the quite small anti-immigration demonstration. Here are the incredibly well-equipped police officers with every weapon they need to shut that down. Here over here is actually the bigger sort of lefty demonstration, police with no weapons saying don't do anything. He showed it so clearly. He showed the two-tier in real time. It's actually a great report and I'm not just saying it because it's GB News. It was really just perfect. So yeah, they're a kind of fake enemy. Some of it is because they know they can't handle these people on a pragmatic level. And actually, you'd almost respect it more if they just said that. And sometimes they do hint at it. That actually, we can't police these people, so we have to do it by fear and intimidation. I mean, that's what really came apart here, wasn't it? It was you police the Muslim gang side cautiously because they will kick off and because of all the backlash, and they'll be outside your police station throwing eggs and stuff like that. The other side won't be doing that as much. So you police them, but you police them much more aggressively because when they do turn violent, it's such a large percentage of the population. Now you're in trouble, and you have to face them down because remember, the elite is always just a small organized minority. They have to face them down so aggressively because they know they can't cope with it. But what we saw was the awareness and the turning violent of this much larger group. And that's what they're terrified of. And I don't know if you saw this graph, and some people were criticizing this. It was from We Think. Did you see this?
I'm not sure.
This poll. How does Britain view violence towards refugees and immigrants? So this is shocking. So 39% agree, 61% disagree, but 39% agree with the statement. When it comes to the refugee problem, violence is sometimes the only means that citizens have to get the attention of British politicians. 39% agreed. 34% agreed attacks against refugee homes are sometimes necessary to make it clear to politicians that we have a refugee problem. Wow. 32% agree hostility against refugees is sometimes justified even if it ends up in violence. 36% agree xenophobic acts of violence are defensible if they result in fewer refugees being settled in your town. Wow. What you have there, and we're in no way condoning violence, obviously. What you have there, though, what can you really say other than that is the absolute repeated failure to listen to a group of people and to actively do every possible thing to goad them and enact every possible policy and put as many people in their community that they don't want. There was a meme, last thing, there was a meme going around the other day from something, I think it's called Wall Street Silver, the account, and it said, I'm sorry, I'm being so passionate today, I'm kind of so angry. Right. It said, it was a woman, a British woman going, I just don't feel safe. And the USA guy was saying to her, you literally voted for this. And it was so annoying because, of course, we didn't vote for it, and I wrote a reply to it. No one voted for this. They voted repeatedly against it. First, we didn't know what hit us with New Labour, all these people coming in. Then Theresa May promises to get immigration down to the tens of thousands. This is repeated by repeated Tory politicians. It never does. It goes up and up. Then absurdly, in the last period of the Tories, post-COVID, it goes up to a massive new level, partly because they thought they needed it for economic recovery, partly due to sheer incompetence, partly no one quite knows why. It reached obscene levels. So we repeatedly voted against it. And I would even say, if you watch those old documentaries about Enoch Powell and stuff, he spooked the establishment with his rhetoric, but the people on the street were very much on his side. we're an island. We've never wanted these numbers of immigration. I know you say it's not just immigration, but if you look at this, and then you've got the migrants, which is a new thing, which is not even legal immigration. It's just people on boats who we have no idea who they are. And if you look at those numbers of people who are saying violence is okay towards them, that's the absolute final refuge of the disenfranchised, isn't it? It's like
that's a
and that's what they would call it if it was Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer did basically call it that. They'd say it was justified and it was the language, and they'd say, oh, it's the language of the oppressed. And you can find all these tweets from lefties saying this and then condemning this one. Well, that's what it is. And it's got more credence than Black Lives Matter because that was based on really a falsehood that white cops statistically target black people, which they don't. Though I understand there might be a sort of lived experience feeling of that. But this is based on stone cold truth. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, that's a tinderbox, isn't it? When you've got 1 in 3 people in the country, if I didn't mishear you, saying that they think essentially that the violence against immigrants is sometimes justified. I mean, that is a seriously shocking statistic. Just on the question of why, I think there is an ideological component, and obviously one can't get into the minds of Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak and these people. But it seems to me that these people at the kind of elite level nowadays, and I don't know what it was like in the past, but it seems to me from my age and limited experience that things may have been different. It seems to me that the elites they are so institutionalized that they find it hard to see anything other than the kind of EU globalist style perspective as an acceptable point of view. And that's really problematic when it comes to relating to ordinary working class people, because globalism is essentially destructive to their communities. You get high levels of immigration that has implications for employment, but also when goods and services and so on, products become internationalized, it takes away from the productivity of one's own nation. So it actually means that those traditional communities that may have produced those things become poorer, and it's essentially assaulting them. That's one of the reasons why Trump is so popular with the working class in America, is because he seems to understand this. But it's people like Starmer seem to have no. I mean, it's an absurdity that this thing about him talking about his dad working in the tool factory and things. It's completely fake. He shows no awareness of the plight of an ordinary person. Again, it's even someone like Farage, and people criticize Farage and say, well, he drinks in these expensive clubs, these gentlemen's clubs in London, and he hobnobs with all the with Prince William and all this kind of stuff. But he does at least seem to understand something of the problems that ordinary people face. But it seems like these elite types, whether they're Tories or whether they're Labour, it seems like they despise these people because they have a kind of ideological preconditioning that prevents them from even considering that the average working class person might have some kind of acceptable and understandable point of view. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's at all levels, really, isn't it? It's partly, as you say, they're globalist liberals. Their ideology is that of the anywhere man, to use that term.
Yeah,
they are the fungible economic units is another phrase I've heard. It's quite good. And they believe, well, as long as we get the GDP up. Now, as Douglas Murray showed in The Strange Death of Europe, it doesn't actually help the economy. They just think it does. It doesn't help GDP per capita. The funny thing is, all this immigration hasn't even helped the average person. It's destroyed services, and it hasn't actually helped the economy either. But they think it does, or they actively want to destroy countries. I mean, that's one argument. But
yeah, that's the kind of more extreme end of the kind of WEF reading.
Yeah.
Like this is intentional. They want to break that. They want to destabilize the nation state so that it becomes easier to move on with the globalist project. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's almost indistinguishable. I mean, their ideology is liberalism, which in itself sort of negates the nation state. So it almost doesn't matter how deliberate it is because it is sort of baked into their ideology anyway. But you see in that Mail Plus piece I alluded to that there was some awareness that there's an economic problem here, but even that doesn't get close to it because it's not the main problem. The main problem is the cultural problem, but that's the problem that they really can't talk about because it'll sound too racist. But you're absolutely right with Starmer. He had an opportunity. He said he was going to be the prime minister for everyone. Of course, I didn't believe it, but he said that. And in that first press conference,
it's not lasted very long, has it?
In the first press conference, it was completely gone. What was maybe shocking, even though I was absolutely ready for it, the extent of it, and then doubling down. the extent of it was alarming. Like even Blair, someone with a bit more skill and flair, or even a bit more empathy, real empathy would have been nice, would not have done that. They would have given something, a morsel, a drop of water in the desert for the working people. But he gave nothing. It was, no, I'm fully of this side, as you say, of this ideology. He famously said he was on the side of Davos over Westminster, didn't he? But not just that, but he's on the side of one specific group, leftist, in combination with immigrants who are kind of their useful idiot class, or the leftists are the useful idiots of the immigrants. I'm not sure, but this strange coalition, that's his side. The ideological left combined with certain immigrant groups that hate the country in many cases, that's his side, and it was absolutely 100% clear. The interesting part will become and see will be this next phase. Here's the interesting part: to see if they do try and do anything about it, because what's going to happen is it's very easy to shut people down at the moment and say, well, you just want violence, you're a rioter. How can you be saying this? How can you possibly be justifying this? It's appalling, right? You're a far right rioter and sympathizer, so shut up.
Yeah,
that's very easy for now. What's going to happen soon is, and he's even had questions like this already and has shut them down. What's going to happen soon is the situation revealed by the anger and by the riots will still be there, but the taboo of implying that you're justifying the riots anyway will be gone, or will have dissipated somewhat. So you'll be able to say, now what are you going to do about these underlying causes? And then he has to answer. He probably won't, but that's where we see it get interesting. You see what I mean? Because you can't just be easily shut down then. But the riots have revealed something. And even though you're not justifying the violence, none of us can pretend they haven't revealed something very ugly underneath the surface about the state of our country.
Yeah.
So now that has to be reckoned with. He has to tackle it. And they'll fail to tackle it. And that's where who knows what comes next.
Yeah, that's the sleight of hand, isn't it? That's the Orwellian language, mind control thing. The sleight of hand they attempt, and that's, as I say, it's been going on since the beginning, is to say that if you in any way express any concern about the underlying causes of these riots, then you are sympathizing with the actions of the rioters themselves, which is just it's a non sequitur. It does not follow, and it was actually expressly ruled out. I mean, I'm disappointed.
But they literally did it for Black Lives Matter. You can look at the old videos of Starmer back to back. Some people put them back to back on the internet. He's talking about injustice. He's talking about this and that. He's kneeling literally. So he's explicitly BLM, saying there is justification to riot off the back of a violent criminal who accidentally, unfortunately, had a tragic drug overdose. You're okay to riot off the back of that, but not off the back of kids bombed in Manchester, kids raped on a systemic level across so many towns, kids stabbed in Southport. And by the way, just quickly on that, it doesn't have to be, notice it wasn't a completely logical thing that blew it all up, because people said, oh, it wasn't a Muslim and so on. It doesn't have to be completely logical, does it? The thing that actually kicks it all off. And you might even have a defense of, if you believe in the Black Lives Matter cause, you might say, well, no one said this, but if they were going to be objective, you might say, well, George Floyd wasn't the ideal guy, but there was just this feeling. So even though I think the feeling was based on nothing, but there was a feeling in this case that almost anything could have set it off. This just happened to be the one. It's still a horrific event, but not strictly logical with some of the things that happen afterwards. But sorry, go on.
It's like I said earlier, it's a tinderbox, isn't it? If you create a scenario in which things are highly febrile and you continually provoke a group of people over and over again, and then they do something violent and destructive, yes, they have to bear responsibility for their actions, but the people who created the environment have to bear some responsibility for the actions as well, particularly when they're actually making it worse through their foolishness. Yeah. So I think that's an important thing. I think on the BLM thing, I mean, obviously I'm of a similar perspective to you, if not exactly the same. But I think one has to again, with all of these things, one has to nuance these things and finesse them, don't they? Because one of the things I object to, I mean, obviously I object to all lawlessness and rioting and things like that. But one of the things that was so odd about the Black Lives Matter thing is how it was translated over to England and Britain when it had nothing to do with us. It was another country, police brutality. I know you've got, you have a reading of what happened. To be honest, I don't know enough about it to have the opinion about George Floyd really. But the point is that it had nothing to do with us. It was a complete irrelevance to us. But even though it didn't happen here, and it was about ostensible police brutality in America towards Black people, visited upon Black people, it was still felt that it was justified to have riots in London, where police were being injured, where people's shops and houses were being smashed up and all this kind of stuff. That was all absolutely fine because of a perceived injustice that wasn't even occurring in this country. Whereas with something like this, which is clearly affecting vast swathes of the country, we're not even allowed to mention the underlying causes because that would be somehow miss the point. And so, when I've listened to, I mean, to be fair, like The Spectator, which is probably the most kind of acceptable, I don't know, I shouldn't really use that word, for me it's like the most kind of acceptable mainstream publication. I think GB News maybe fit in the same kind of category. Of course, GB News is a TV channel, but The Spectator, when I was listening to the podcast that they were putting out just after this stuff, it was like I was thinking, what's the point of even having these podcasts? Because you just literally, it's just an opportunity for 2 or 3 people to get together and just say, oh, it's terrible that these people are rioting. They're thugs. Let's close them down. And what can we do about it? Maybe social media should be censored and all this kind of stuff. To be fair, Douglas Murray is very good, and I think that he writes and speaks very well. But there does seem to be such a double standard there. I just don't see how people can not be aware of it when those two things are put side by side.
Yeah, a couple of things there. One is firstly on two-tier Keir. There's a good thing that Andrew Doyle shared. Too many Twitter prosecutions could damage free speech, says DPP. This was Starmer back in 2013. And I'd already shared a few days. Huh?
Starmer said that.
Yeah, and I'd already shared a few days earlier. It's Starmer from 2015. Gove is right on our 2-tier justice system, but cuts cause this crisis. So he admitted in a different context there was a 2-tier system, but he was talking about money and things. I said, well, agreeing with 2015 Keir Starmer, get me arrested by 2024 Keir Starmer. So he acknowledges in the past there is a 2-tier system in a different context, and he acknowledges that Twitter prosecutions are not ideal. So now he's forgotten all that. And as you say, the fact that he's there kneeling for Black Lives Matter, we've got him completely. We've got all the photo evidence and the video evidence. If it had said at that time anything similar, but he didn't, he doubled down on how amazing it all was, and you should definitely protest. And this time it's completely opposite. And as you say, that wasn't even in our country. The two situations aren't even equal. It would have been totally fine for him to say that's not in our country and it's questionable. Let's ignore it. But he didn't. He was like, yes, justice for George Floyd, but in this case, no justice for the English people. I know, madness.
Yeah.
Well, not madness.
And we're talking about children being massacred, and also I think you have to take the blown up. I think you have to take into account the wider context. Well, these grooming gangs. If you listen to people talking about their knowledge of these things, who have actually experienced this firsthand, this is absolutely from the pits of hell. What happens to these young girls? They are kidnapped, raped, drugged. I've heard reports of them, tongues being nailed to tables, kept in cages, cut up into little pieces.
They threaten to pour a boiling kettle into their mouth or bleach and stuff. Yeah, everything. It's so much. It's actually so bad that people almost can't.
Yeah, they can't believe it, can they? Yeah. I mean, I listened to Jordan Peterson's conversation with Tommy Robinson, which I think is a fascinating podcast, and it's really. Have you listened to that?
I actually haven't.
I mean, it's really, really worth listening.
Fascinating that he did it, because in this country, Tommy Robinson's seen as this toxic boogeyman, whereas in North America, not seen in the same way. So Peterson can interview.
I think it's personally, I think it's part of the psyop with Tommy Robinson. I think he's a rugged and what would you say? Like he's not like an angel. I've seen videos of him like punching people and doing all sorts of things, but I do not believe that he's a racist. And I think that he was and continues to try and expose the injustices around grooming gangs and things like that. And I think he's been absolutely targeted by the state and falsely imprisoned. He could very well have been killed in prison. He tells the story of his treatment in prison. I just think it's a massive psyop, and I'd really encourage people to listen to the Jordan Peterson one. And also, also his address at the Oxford Union. I don't know whether you saw that. That was several.
Yeah, I did. I saw that years ago, and that did make a big difference to me, because that was when I showed that to people, they all thought that, oh, he's this evil person. They saw that and you go, oh, he's a guy from a town that's changed and destroyed, and he's just saying, this is my home and what's happening.
From Luton. And he was very aware from early on that these young girls who were being groomed were not being protected by the police. They were turning a blind eye to it. And just to anyone who's listening to this, you might think, oh, maybe Jamie's going off the deep end here. all I'd ask people in terms of Tommy Robinson, as I say, I'm not saying he's an angel. I'm not saying, that I endorse him fully or anything like that. But what I would say is, like, ask yourself how much you actually know about Tommy Robinson and what he's supposed to have done, and ask yourself what basis there is for calling him a racist or calling him far right or anything like that. And if you don't know about it, then listen to his interviews and hear what he's got to say for himself, because it's like one of those memes, isn't it, that goes around. Oh, Tommy Robinson, that's like a kind of that's another way of talking about the worst person that you can possibly think of in the world. You can't even mention his name because he's so evil. But this
What's
is
quite funny is some on the right now, maybe on the further parts of the right. Well, some on the further parts of the right think he's too, he's an Israel shill.
yeah.
Then some think, oh, he's too big on multiculturalism. Actually, it's only Islam he's got a problem with. So actually, he's kind of a bit of a lib. That's on the right. And other people think he damages the causes that that he espouses because he's too reckless with posting and doesn't check the information and stuff. So there's a few critiques on the right of Tommy Robinson now.
There's going to be critiques of someone like that on all sides, because he's a normal working class passionate bloke. He's very, very articulate. He just throws things out. He doesn't, maybe he doesn't think things through as he should do. I'm not defending any of that, but the idea that he, is a racist, is a white racist, I just think is completely false. I mean, apart from anything else, he's always had people, he's always worked with people who are not white. He's had Sikhs, even had Muslims and people like that in the
yeah. No, he's always been very big on that. Yeah, it's nonsense all that. It's just he just has a problem with Islam, which is fairly clear on.
Well, and it's not even Islam in general. It's just to the extent that these Islamic gangs have been engaging in these activities. But as I say, Nick, I mean, in some ways, I don't necessarily want to get distracted with that. I just feel that that's an important thing for people to reckon with, because if you actually listen to him and listen to his concerns, what everyone thinks about him, the concerns are completely legitimate, and he's speaking a lot more truth than somebody like Keir Starmer is speaking. So that's just that's kind of a sidebar.
I'm a bit worried about the whole podcast, because normally, like, your podcast is like relatively gentle. You have like Daniel sort of saying, "Oh, things were a bit better in the 90s, weren't they?" You just got Nick just ranting for an hour about, because I was just so angry about it all. So I might seem different to normal because I've just been so angry about it, and not even on my behalf, but like you say, a lot of these girls and things, and like you say, the Spectator and people like this, very wet. I mean, they're basically liberals. And then Tim Stanley, very shockingly, on GB said that Twitter should be shut down.
Yeah.
And it's shocking from the Telegraph, really bizarre. And he said, look at us now, we're having a self-moderated conversation. Like, not really. You're on an Ofcom regulated channel that's heavily regulated by Ofcom, which is a weapon of the left. So that's all. And even GB, I probably can't say too much without being sacked, but they did want us to sort of one night, emphasize there's also far-right groups. And I think I said it once, and they wanted me to sort of say it more, and I just refused. And I was like, if I have to get sacked for this, I will, because I'm not throwing our listeners and the people under the bus. Then a couple of days later, I saw a guy with a Nazi swastika. I was like, okay, yeah, that guy might be actually far right. I'll give you that, but I'm not going to throw people on the bus and say they're all far right. And there's not really evidence that these far right groups were bussed in, came in from other areas. There's not really much evidence of that either, that it really was this organized thing. Anyway,
well, let me ask you this then, because I did actually I canvassed our Telegram people for questions and things to ask you, and people can join our Telegram, by the way. It's t.me/Irreverend, but it's a good group. It's great people. Yours is a lot better than mine. Anyway, so a couple of things. So how afraid is Nick of the crackdown on free speech, and does he fear the repercussions to the extent that it will change his voiced opinion? Nick has put out some great tweets about Starmer. I'd like to know his thoughts on what he thinks the next year is going to look like.
Okay, so it's like a two-part. So
there's two different questions.
So the first one was really interesting because we didn't get into it that much. The attacks on Elon, which I'm calling Musk derangement syndrome, have been so insane that I think it makes them look very, very weak. And we saw that we did touch on that person from the EU basically trying to censor Musk's Twitter space with Trump before it even happened. And now the EU put out a statement indicating that wasn't from the EU. So even the EU are distancing themselves from that.
Yeah, so I was interested in that because I wasn't aware of that. What actually happened there?
So that guy, what's his name? Thierry Breton from memory? He put out a statement that basically tried to threaten Elon Musk before the space with Trump, saying, remember, you're beholden to this EU nonsense and that, and blah, blah, blah. Thierry Breton, European Commissioner for Internal Market and Services. I mean, he put out this post And it was very strange. And Musk responded with the Tropic Thunder meme, which was too explicit for a Christian podcast, but it was basically told him where to go in no uncertain terms. And it was absolutely hilarious. But now you've got this thing. Look at the FT here. Brussels slaps down Thierry Breton over harmful content letter to Elon Musk. So Brussels has said that he went rogue and that wasn't something that was coming from the EU. So the timing and wording of the letter were neither coordinated or agreed with the president nor with the commissioners. So how about that? So they've just gone like, you've gone mental there, mate. And it's interesting how mental everyone's gone about Musk. There's been a whole memo that's gone out to the NPCs, Spaceship Man bad, because we've seen John Sopel, and I did a reply to John Sopel, which
can you just say what NPC stands for? Nick?
Non-player character. NPC, so that's the people who can't think, and they're just the grey men from the memes, just all saying the same thing.
I thought it was some like technical media term that I didn't understand, but yeah.
No, it's memes. Always just right-wing memes with me. Okay. But it's the grey men all saying the same thing at the same time, and the new memo has gone out. Well, there used to be a meme a while ago, Spaceship Man bad, when Musk bought Twitter, but there's been a new version of that because look at who's attacked him. Alistair Campbell, Armando Iannucci, Rory Stewart, as I think you mentioned. So many people in the kind of lib class. And there was John Sopel did a stupid one of like at Primrose Hill going, look, I'm here and it's totally fine, Elon. No civil war here. And so I put out a parody tweet about like, hey, Elon, like I'm here in one of the most expensive parts of London. No one's been raped or stabbed in 8 minutes. How'd you like them apples, Spaceship Man? Some people took that seriously. This is Twitter. Some people thought I was seriously saying that. I was seriously bragging about no stabbings in the last 8 minutes, and they were attacking me for it. People are so mind-bogglingly stupid on Twitter. Anyway, and then there was a stabbing the next day in Leicester Square, sort of proving my satire bleakly correct. The question was, so I've gone off topic about free speech.
Yeah,
they are very, very threatened by the free speech that X/Twitter represents, and their lashing out shows their weakness because they don't know what to do with Elon Musk, and they're not winning. They're not winning in the public eye. They're not winning in any way because he's a brilliant character. Because I described it as I described it way better on Twitter, but basically he's someone who refuses to play the game that with more power one should compromise integrity and become more politic and become more Machiavellian. And he just says, no, I'm just going to carry on being myself, even the stupid parts of myself, even at this level. And that just blows their minds. They can't understand it because we don't have a culture based in honor and integrity. But the funny thing is, in the past, I've been listening to Starkey's Monarchy. In the past, things like honor were like baked into the system. They were compulsory, and people were always having to marry someone they didn't want and execute someone they didn't strictly want to. There's all these like rules. And now the only rule is power and status, and they can't understand why Musk would damage his own status like this. And the answer is he's just being himself because he can, and he believes in free speech, and he's just doing what he wants. He occasionally gets it wrong. He shared this thing about detainment camps in the Falklands that Starmer was going to put people in. Darren Grimes shared it, and I looked at it, I thought, hang on, Darren, that's not real, is it? It took me seconds to check that it wasn't real. And I thought, we've got to be not putting these things out. And then Musk tweeted it at like 4 a.m. apparently, but he put it out as well. And it's like, that is the kind of thing Starmer would do, but guys, can we at least check? So he occasionally makes mistakes, but he's generally in the right direction.
Do you think there's just jump in. Do you think there's a sense with somebody like Musk? I think a similar thing about J.K. Rowling is you get to the point where you're so powerful and you're so rich, so you actually don't have to curry favor with anyone, so you can just do what you like.
You can, but what's actually far more common, seems to me, is that the higher people go up the totem pole, the more opportunity there is, the more incentive there is to compromise. And Andrew Tate or someone talks about refusing the matrix's advances, and people can sell out. Alex Jones, like, they offered me to sell out and I didn't. But I think there is something in that. Why most people with FU money don't actually say FU. They say, oh yeah, how can I get more power? And yeah, I'll work with you, Biden, to censor my algorithm and all. Whereas Musk is just rare because he's gone, nah, I'm not playing the game no matter what level I get to. And what's the point of getting to this level if I don't use this power? But most people don't. On the free speech, I'm getting carried away there, but I've alluded to it earlier with the shocking case of the kid that went away for 38 months. Yeah, the crackdown is insane. I put out a tweet sort of say I'm sitting here as an English person in England, and I'm alluding to the fact that it's my own country and to our sort of history of civil liberties. Sitting here thinking, will I be arrested for this tweet? Meanwhile, people are openly talking about shutting down social media in our fake news. So I'm like, we have a tyranny. The government's turned tyrannical. And that got like almost 40,000 likes. So indicating, not boasting, but indicating that people agree.
Mm.
And Charlotte Gill had a similar one. I noticed she got more people attacking her, which I think is because people like to bully women. Midwit centrist dads like to bully women on the internet. But a lot of people are feeling like this. What can I post? We don't know at the moment what we can post that will get us arrested. It may well be that it's purely based on status or how likely are we to cause a fuss or have any resources. But we don't know. It's a real tyranny when you don't know what can get you arrested and what can't. And that, you can just find the crime to fit the punishment. What was the second part of the question?
Oh, the second, I think it was just a second question, wasn't it? It was about what you think the next year is going to be like.
Yeah, well, I've already sort of answered in that I think Starmer will have to be held accountable in some way. I know we've got the fake news media, but in some way, there'll be growing pressure on him to actually deal with the underlying causes of these problems, which he won't be able to fob off with, you're just a far-right thug. That's going to happen.
Mm.
I think there'll be more doubling down from Labour. We've already seen Angela Rayner say council houses won't be given priority to British people, so they're already rolling back on that. There'll be more economic pain. They'll realise they've got no money. The Labour government's going to get rapidly, incredibly unpopular. I think it becomes incredibly unpopular and they struggle to even hang on for 5 years. That's actually my prediction, but could go the other way because then you look and you see we still have a load of idiots in the country who'll back Labour, whatever they do. So hard to say.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I do find the crackdown on Twitter and the policing of speech very disturbing, I have to say. Like you, it puts you in a situation where you think, and look, to be honest with you, Nick, I don't actually use my Twitter account all that much. I repost stuff from my church and things like that.
You're missing all my gold. I'm like, why is Jamie not liking
No, I mean,
this?
I read. No, I read, and I do occasionally like as well. But I don't put. What I mean is, I don't really write I don't use tweets for like commentary very much and things like that. But even so, one still thinks to oneself, goodness me, like if I say the wrong thing here, or if I just make a slight slip or the nuance is slightly wrong, I could literally end up in prison. And it's a very, very disturbing, isn't it, to be in this country and to have those kind of thoughts and intimations, given our history, given our tradition, which is all based around freedom, liberty, freedom of expression, freedom of association. There is just a sort of tightening, isn't there, of what is acceptable to say and what is not. And as you say, at the most extreme end, it's just, if you tweet the wrong thing, you're in prison. I mean, it's
hard to exaggerate. Starmer has destroyed the reputation of this country in incredibly short order. We're an international laughingstock. Americans are tweeting, laughing at us. There was this tweet, wasn't there, from the government, think before you post. That one got absolutely obliterated. Then there was the one, thinking about visiting the UK, you might need this kind of visa. And everyone just, 7,000 replies, got like 200 likes, 7,000 replies last I checked. All the people saying, why would I want to visit this communist bleep hole where I can be put in prison for my thoughts, or if I'm the wrong way, hammering it. So everyone knows what's happening. And of course, the fact that Musk keeps calling him two-tier Keir, he's an international laughingstock. And it doesn't help us because we are the ones suffering in this banana republic. And people have said, and I've worried about getting arrested for treason or something, but, are America going to step in and liberate us? I mean, Trump, at least, if Trump was in the White House already, I'd like to think he'd at least say to Starmer, do something like, because he can threaten him with trade, he can threaten him with defense.
Yeah.
He could at least say to him, nudge him a little bit and say, you really should really be treating your people like that. But if we get Harris and Starmer, then the West is over. Last thing on the predictions as well.
Yeah.
If we get Harris and Starmer, it's the end of the West. And as for what will happen in this country, I see it more like France, skirmishes erupting every few weeks or months, not out and out civil war. And I reject that it's a civil war anyway, because this is actually really a foreign enemy that we've let into the country. I don't want to use the word that got Suella in so much trouble, but it's not really a civil war, in my opinion. It's a very unique kind of 21st century war where we've let in the enemy and welcomed them in. It's not North versus South or monarchy versus Parliament or Protestant versus Catholic. But it will be something like that. It will be skirmishes, violence erupting from time to time for the next year, I predict.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, I can't see how this problem is going to get any better, to be honest with you, because of I arguably it's gone too far anyway. Our birth rate is coming down. I think is it in 2025 it's predicted that the amount of people dying, indigenous people in this country dying, is going to be a greater number than the amount of people being born. So the indigenous population is coming down. Meanwhile, immigration is what legal immigration is at 600,000 people a year, say, even if Labour managed to bring it down somewhat. We've also got a load of illegal immigration. So this problem is just going to get worse and worse and worse. So it's really hard to see from a sort of purely worldly perspective, how things can get any better. Of course, I hope that it creates a situation in which the gospel can be preached and people can understand that our hope is in Christ, not just for ourselves as individuals, but for our culture and for our society as well. But on a kind of on a straightforward level, there is no solution to this problem. Things have already gone way, way too far, and it seems to me like the only way you could actually change that is just by trying to, or let's say all that could be done really is to just try and make the problem not as bad as it potentially could be, and to probably slow down the effects of what's already happened. But it seems, it seems really, you can understand why these people feel so hopeless and so angry, I think.
Yeah, no one has the political will to do what's required, and it would be completely outside the Overton window, because Trump's now started talking about mass deportations. He says number 2 of his core promises, well, 1 is seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. 2, carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. Now, presumably he's talking about illegals, but the will you would need to do that in this country. The only person who sounds even vaguely serious in the Tories is Jenrick, who of course resigned over immigration and has a serious immigration plan, whereas I think Kemi is an anti-woke liberal, not really conservative, despite talking about Scruton and Sowell. I think Jenrick sounds the most serious, but I'm certainly not going to hold my breath for the Tories to anything. But you'd need a politician to come out and say something so bold that it would be immediately rejected by it wouldn't even be allowed in the political system. Even Farage, they think, is the devil. So what's required, no one's going to have the will to do it, and it's too late, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, when you listen to Trump, I listened to just over half of the Trump Musk thing. It was last night that it was on, wasn't it? I think
the night before.
Oh, was it the night before? I listened to it today, and it's just if you listen to what Trump is saying, it just is so sensible. It's like you can immigrate to this country. Is immigrate a word? You can come to this country, but you have to do it legally. Like, it has to be legal, and the amount of legal immigrants has to be something that we decide, and that works for us, works for our country. Now, that is just sense, isn't it? It has to be legal, so there's no illegal immigration. That has to stop, and there has to be a serious attempt to stop it. And secondly, there have to be, we have to agree that, this amount of people come, and, these are the kinds of qualifications that there are to come into the country, whether they're humanitarian or whether it's because it benefits our economy in some way, actually benefits our economy, or something like that. And you get this problem under control through common sense, wise policies of that sort. Now, why is that? Why has that become such a controversial thing to say, which is almost equated with racism, isn't it? And as you say, the political ability to do that in this country, just to say those basic things, seems almost non-existent. I think Farage is sort of saying that kind of thing, isn't he? And as you say, maybe somebody like Jenrick as well. But whether they could actually get in a position where they could actually ever implement any of these policies, it seems unlikely.
Yeah, well, you're right. And so many people, like, I saw a long thread from James Altucher, who's like a financial chess podcasting guy who actually follows me, but he's got a very interesting podcast. But he put out a long thread saying, isn't everything Trump's saying just common sense? And he's just like, you're seeing this a lot now from the kind of tech world in America. A lot of them are switching to Trump. Musk said on the space he used to be an Obama supporter, moderate Democrat. The tech world is switching over to Trump. Many people are switching over because they go, well, hang on, it's mad, incompetent communist versus some very centrist, sensible position, which is all Trump really is. Basically, sort of liberal, center-left liberal position or something, or sometimes center-right. That's it. Yeah, loads of people are coming to that conclusion. It's not that mad. So all we've got to hope is that there's no rigged election and Trump gets in and some kind of something reasonable is brought in America. But yeah, if he doesn't, it's going to be very dark.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Did you have any highlights from the Trump Musk debate? I particularly enjoyed his repetition of the "drill, baby, drill" line, which I found very amusing. Were there any highlights for you?
Oh, there were loads of highlights. It's in my article on nickdixon.net. But there were, for example, He said, I think Biden's close to vegetable stage, in my opinion. He said Biden's already had a low IQ, but over the last 30 years it's gone down. I'm not even sure there's nothing on the board now. And he said he did a subtle dig at Kamala. He said she had this Time magazine cover. She looked so beautiful, like the most beautiful actress. It was a drawing. He said it was a drawing. So just like she looked beautiful. It was a drawing. He said so many funny things. We're going to have a big, beautiful dome. He didn't use the phrase big, beautiful dome. He said, why can't we have an iron dome?
Yeah, he
They've
should
got
have
an
said
iron
big,
dome,
beautiful dome. Yeah.
There was so many funny. There was even more. There was so many more than that. They're not even the main ones, but it was hilarious. Trump is hilarious. We all know that. That's and he can talk for 2 hours. He'll ramble a little bit. He'll make some good points and he'll make some hilarious jokes, and that's Trump. And
they spent a lot of time
illegal immigration. I don't know if it was Musk or Trump that said, but because he looked at the sign and missed the bullet. Illegal immigration saved my life. Yeah. Sky News was running with that under the headline. Bizarre comment from Trump. It's like, it's called a joke, Sky.
It's not bizarre in any way, is it? Sometimes you think with like the MSM, are they literally incapable of understanding irony or just
no, they know because they put it in the body of the piece. Newsweek did it as well. They said Trump says he'll flee to Venezuela. It was Trump joking around with Musk going, I'll meet you in Venezuela if Kamala gets in because that'll be safer in this country. Yeah. Then it's like, Donald Trump says he will flee to Venezuela if he loses election. It's like, that's quite a different point, isn't it? Newsweek. Yeah. And Sky was, Donald Trump makes bizarre claim in delayed chat with Elon Musk on X. It was, the claim was illegal immigration saved my life. It's a joke about the sign, and you know that, you scumbags. Anyway, sorry.
No.
Any more questions? I don't want to leave your listeners hanging before I go.
No. Well, we've got a few questions from our listeners. Maybe why don't we have?
Well, I'm just worried that I don't answer them because I've got limited time left. But
well, we've got we've got until 4, don't we? So let's say we've got like 20 minutes. Have we? Is it okay? At least. So a couple of things. So somebody asked, we did a number of Bible podcasts on your podcast, The Current Thing, and we were talking quite a lot about David Pawson on that. So somebody asked how you're progressing with the David Pawson Bible Unlocked series, and that this person says, I'm currently working my way through his autobiography, Not As Bad As the Truth, and would highly recommend it. That's quite a cool title for an autobiography.
That's funny.
Not as bad.
He's a funny guy. Yeah. Really badly. I mean, I've been meaning to read the Tower of Babel again and all the stuff around it and try and do another one of those with Jamie, and we didn't get around to doing it. And I felt bad. Basically, permanent guilt is how I feel. I should be a Catholic. Just permanent guilt because I've not been looking at it, and I've been reading other stuff, but and listening to other stuff. But I've stopped unlocking the Bible for now. It's locked. But so I've stopped going through the Pawson. But I watched a lot of the videos and read a lot of that stuff, but not lately. And I just feel just for whatever reason. I don't know how I was saying to you before the podcast, I don't know how you read so much anyway. I don't have the IQ. I just don't know how you do it. And then I realized it's because you didn't know what softbox lighting was, and you make space in your brain. This is my theory. As well as being smarter, you make space in your brain by not knowing other things.
There's all sorts of there's this vast swathes of ignorance that people just don't uncover as a routine matter, of course. But yeah, definitely there's just several areas of human, normal human existence that I'm just completely ignorant of. I say softbox lighting.
Softbox lighting, but then you're reading 1,000-page books constantly, which I just can't read anymore.
Occasionally.
I'm trying to grasp up on all the kings and get through Starkey's Monarchy and stuff like this, and I'm reading the novel Stoner as well, which is a great novel.
I've read that. Is it John Williams?
Yeah, it's not about what you think, and it is so good.
Oh, it's such great.
It took me ages to read it, but
have you read it?
I'm nearly at the end now, but I stopped for some reason. I kind of savor it.
Oh, we can't talk about the ending because
no, we can't talk about the ending because I kind of savor it and come back to it weirdly because and every time you pick it up, it's so good, but then I just don't allow myself to read it.
You know what? That novel. I over the last, say 10, 15 years of my life, I found it really hard to think about books that have reduced me to tears. And maybe there's been like 2 or 3, and that novel is one of them.
Don't give away spoilers, but yeah, it's pretty bleak, but it's just so beautifully written.
It's
so good. Yeah. But yes, Pawson, I'm doing really badly, but I'm glad some people have read Pawson perhaps off the back of those podcasts, even if I'm too wretched to carry on with it.
Yeah, great. Okay. I feel like I should say something encouraging, but
don't have to. We've got
maybe I will in a minute. So this is actually sort of a nice comment here. Nick often makes comments on the Weekly Skeptic podcast about his poor health or lack of sleep or his mental state. He's a pretty funny and intelligent guy, and I'm sure many listeners worry about him. Not that being funny or intelligent is a prerequisite for people worrying about a person, of course. I definitely would benefit from being around a Christian. I definitely think he would benefit from being around a Christian community / church as a space for prayer, worship, and a support network in these troubling times. So that's, I think it's quite nice, Nick, because sometimes on Weekly Skeptic, which I listen to every week, by the way, and I support the podcast as well, because it's one of maybe like 2 podcasts I listen to every week.
Oh, thanks.
But you often say like, oh, every time you mention like your mental health, you get all these comments about like, oh, why are you talking about your mental health? You're supposed to be just a dispenser of right-wing reactionary opinions or whatever it might be. But I think it's nice that our listeners, obviously, maybe because some of them are Christians, maybe they're a bit more concerned about you. But don't know if there's anything you want to say about any of those things.
Well, I stopped talking about it a while ago. Yeah, one, because I got such vicious comments about it that were making me just hate people, because I thought I sold it in a fairly funny, self-deprecating way, but people just kept saying, "Stop talking about it, Nick." And I hated these people so much, although it's unhealthy for me to hate people this much. So I'll have to stop talking about it so that people don't comment. The other thing was, it also just got a bit better. It got really, really bad, and then it got better. And I'm not thinking about it now because I'm just trying not to jinx it and bring it back. And one thing that helped, may not like this, was sort of more new agey spirituality, was like people like Michael Singer, who, I don't know if you know about him, but he's
like an atheist secularist guy, is he?
He was a businessman. He's originally Jewish, but he was a businessman. He does talk about the Bible a lot, but he was a businessman who, in fact, it's kind of a long story, but he got obsessed with trying to conquer the voice in his head, and stopped listening to it, and he went to the woods in Florida just to try and meditate. And he had this and try and figure out what was going on. And he ended up, to cut long story short, he ends up accidentally starting a multi-billion-dollar business, but he doesn't really want to. Someone comes along and says, "Can I meditate on your property?" And his brain's going, "No," but he has to ignore his brain. So he goes, "Okay, I guess if this is what life's presenting," and he lets them. Then they want to build a house on his property. Then he lets them. Then he ends up building houses. Someone says, "Can you build me a house?" He's like, "No," but he ends up building him a house. He ends up having a building business. Then it goes on. He turns out he gets into computer programming, and they're like, "Can you do this program for us?" He's like, "No." But he's like, "Oh, they've asked me to now." Ends up doing this computer program, starts a programming company, ends up being worth billions.
Wow.
But throughout the whole time, he tries to not listen to the voice in his head, which is where all this nonsense comes from, anxiety and stuff. And he just tries to sort of embrace the moment and embrace life broadly. And he even gets investigated by the FBI. And during that time, manages to write this best-selling book, The Untethered Soul, where he espouses these opinions. The other book is A Surrender Experiment, where he is more of his autobiography. But he gets investigated unfairly by the FBI, could have gone to prison. And he goes, "Okay, this is a good test to really apply these things up there." But that helped me a lot, because it was a lot of the problem was me constantly thinking I was going to get ill. I often wasn't actually ill. I had like low level things, but I'm actually in pretty good health most of the time. But it was me constantly thinking I would. And it's a really horrible mental illness. It's hypochondria, but it got so bad with me that it was really, really bad. It hasn't been around lately, so I'm going to just sort of, I did that stuff. It really helped me. Maybe I've been a bit busier. Were
there any practices or anything he sort of specifically recommended in those books, or was it just reading his, example? Or
what I did was just listen to his podcast, listen to his books all day, every day for weeks. And what it did was I must have internalized some of those lessons, but then you definitely slip back in them. But they were really about, he was not very big on particular practices, even though people always wanted them. He sort of talks about it as more of as a whole like lifestyle. It's not listening to the weird voice in your head and not acting upon it and getting just more and more used to that as a practice. And he sort of pointed out, you got these billions of people, you got this vast swathes of time. You're here in this one moment, and if it's not completely perfect for how you happen to want it in this moment, you're upset and you're angry or you're anxious. And he's like, that's completely insane. Like, what are the chances that the moment would just be perfect for you? Very rarely happens. And the rest of the time you're furious because, that person shouldn't have sat there, and this car shouldn't have cut me off, and blah, blah, blah. Or this person shouldn't have said this at work. I've had lots of people be horrible to me at work pretty much constantly, but he goes, well, make people stop being rude to you then. Oh, no one's ever been able to do that. Okay. Well then, so he's very big on like this sort of taking yourself out of it as this egotistical center of things. And he does talk about the Bible, but it doesn't. But he's one of these guys like Eckhart Tolle will reference it, but he's coming from the sort of spirituality angle. But I was really big on it a few months ago. But now you're asking me, I'm kind of recalling it more because I've sort of left it behind for a bit.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. The
But
Untethered Soul, he said.
Yeah, Untethered Soul and Surrender Experiment. But it doesn't answer your listener's question there about a church. So I still don't have a church, but I appreciate their concern. I've been feeling a lot better lately, at least in that regard.
Yeah, well, that's good. I've been reading an extraordinary book recently, and I want to publicize this book as much as possible. But then I also thought it might be helpful for you, not specifically for any reason, but just because sometimes you struggle with, or at least when we've talked, you struggle with those kind of things that you just mentioned. But it's this book called Breath by an American science writer called James Nestor. Have you ever heard of this book?
I think you might have mentioned Nestor to me, but other than that, I don't.
Have I already mentioned it to you, like via WhatsApp or something?
I don't know. The name rings a bell.
Anyway, it's this extraordinary book about the effect of the way that we breathe upon our health, our mental health, our physical health, our facial structure, our sleep, problems associated with sleep, like sleep apnea and snoring and things like that. Our physical performance in terms of exercise, but just in general, how we're able to function physically. I've literally never really thought about the importance of the way one breathes or any kind of issues related to that, and I found it utterly mind-blowing. I mean, I have to say, incredibly mind-blowing. And I've practiced things like contemplative prayer and things like that, but I've never actually focused on the breathing aspects of them. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to say too much more about it because people will get bored of me talking about it. But honestly, this book, Breath by James Nestor, it is genuinely mind blowing, and He does have breathing exercises in the back of the book, which even if you don't sort of read the whole thing, you can just read the breathing exercises.
And does he have you like Wim Hof sitting in a load of ice?
He talks about Wim Hof later in the book, but that style of breathing exercise, that's more extreme one. That's called Tummo, where you breathe really, really quickly and then very, very slowly. And that puts you into a kind of deep state of relaxation, and it does give people the ability to stay warm in like sub-zero temperatures and things like that. But there's just
I think breathing is one of the best things you can do just quick. If you have stomach problems or something, like breathe in and out deeply 5 times before eating just to make sure you're settled. And that when you are anxious, that's the best thing you can do. You can't talk yourself out of it because that's the same brain talking nonsense. You can breathe, but if you do like some deep breaths, that's the most likely to immediately change your state, isn't it?
Yeah, your physiological state can be changed very, very quickly by deep breathing through the nose. I mean, just simple kind of breathing exercises like breathing in for 5 seconds through your nose and then breathing out for 5 seconds and just doing that for 5-10 minutes. But, we know that our physiological state has effect on our emotions, has effect on our soul, if you like. And so, even I would say, even just from a straightforward kind of like perspective, of Christian perspective of like well-being, it's more than worth looking into these basic practices. I mean, things like Tummo are more extreme things, but yeah, just basic kind of what would you call it? Like I can't really think of the right word, but
breath work is what it's called.
Breath hygiene or something like that. Just think about thinking about that kind of thing. I mean, it's incredible. And then you can also pair these breathing exercises with styles of contemplative prayer as well, which is quite something to think about. But anyway, that book, Breath by James Nestor, it's mind blowing. I know it's going to sound like, because I've said to you before we started recording, I was talking about this great book called The Man on a Donkey. Then I've said Stoner is one of the only books that's reduced me to tears. And now I'm saying this book has blown my mind in a way which no book has ever blown my mind before. It's going to sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm really not. There are just some really great books out there.
The question is how, with all these kids and stuff, you read so many books. This is the question. I used to read 100 a year novels for some reason. I was obsessed with fiction. I did an MA in literature, but now I don't. Now I struggle. I do audiobooks. I struggle to read now. I guess I've just become dumbed down and thick and ADHD. But you're like reading these 1,000-page tomes every day.
No, I'm not reading them every day. But I tell you what I do is as a discipline is I try and read for an hour a day. Don't always do it. Not going to do it today. Didn't do it yesterday, but I do it quite a lot. And I have a spiritual book which I'll read for 15 minutes in the morning. And then normally what I do is I do like 3 15-minute slots of reading some other kind of what I think of as a kind of knowledge book, or it might be just a book for just my own interest, like breath would be like that. But often I read a book about, some aspect of theology or the Bible or something in that slot. So doing that and actually timing things as well. I don't just do that with reading. I do that with loads of tasks. Timing things I think is really, really helpful. Like if you've got a job to do and it's going to take, you think you can do it in 10 minutes, literally putting a timer on and timing yourself. Something about that, I think it just gives you mental focus. I don't know if you've ever tried it.
I know the Pomodoro 20-minute thing, the tomato, but
Yeah.
this is interesting. We should be doing it. We should be doing the Tim Ferriss stuff. What does your day look like? So you get up at 5 a.m. You do a prayer. How long does that last? 7.5 minutes. Okay. So you actually get up and do a spiritual reading of 15 minutes.
Yeah,
which could be like the Bible or some other religious
no,
text.
that would be apart from the Bible. So like get up,
apart from the Bible.
Yeah, get up, have a period of meditation upon, that might be like upon scripture, or it might be, I have a book of daily meditations, which I used. Then I do morning prayer. Then I do some Bible memorization. And then after I've done that, I do my 15-minute spiritual reading, which is
how long is the Bible memorization?
That takes like 10, 15 minutes normally.
But that's kind of your job. Is that for like the day's sermon or something?
No, I just literally committing scripture to memory. Like just rote memory.
And then you do your 15-minute spiritual reading, which is what?
Just some kind of spiritually edifying book. So at the moment, like I'm reading a book by an evangelical writer called Dallas Willard on spiritual formation, called Renovation of the Heart. Prior to that, I read a book on it's an extraordinary book, Nick. It's one of the most amazing books I've ever read. What is it called? Letters from a Modern Mystic by a man called Frank Laubach, who was a missionary in the Philippines in the 1930s and 40s. Incredible book. Yeah. So great book.
So you'll do a spiritual, great book, great people. So you'll do, Tom doesn't read. So you'll do a 15-minute spiritual. Then you'll have these 15-minute bursts later where you're like 50 minutes of, David Stark, and then put it down. Timer goes off.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how you get through these 1,000-page tomes.
Yeah. But then also, additionally, I read a novel in the evening.
Here we go. See,
often before I go to bed.
And the novel I'm writing this down.
Yeah.
Plus novel in the evening.
What I do with it, when we're doing novel, when I'm being more disciplined.
There's all these additional bits. Oh, then obviously I read poetry for 6 hours throughout the night. I mean, that's obvious. Everyone's doing that. You keep adding these letters to it.
No, but honestly, if you do things in small chunks, like so like the Bible memorization thing, for example, you spend 10 minutes a day memorizing the Bible, and you do it in a systematic way, you will end up memorizing thousands and thousands and thousands of verses of the Bible if you do that over a period of years. Similarly, if you read 10 pages of a novel every day just before bed, it doesn't take long to read 10 pages of a novel, you will end up reading it depends on how long your novel is, but you'll end up reading like 12 novels a year, of a substantial size. And then if you read more, when you have leisure time, like at the weekend I have more time, then you end up reading more. But you've got that kind of base, base rhythm where you're always getting things done. You're always doing it. Sometimes it might speed up because you're enjoying it and you don't have to discipline yourself.
Yeah.
But you'll always be getting through stuff.
I'm weird enough now that even if I'm enjoying it, like I love this novel Stoner, I'll still put it down for like a few weeks or something. It's like, why are you not letting yourself read Stoner? It's kind of really weird, but I'm incredibly weird. You're just disciplined. When at my peak of the novels, I would do 100 pages a day I would aim for.
Yeah.
And I was aiming for something like 100 novels a year, and I was sometimes beating that. And that could be things like Moby Dick, which are absolutely massive.
Yeah.
And so that was many years ago when I had very little else to do. Now I'm cranking out podcasts. I'm doing my gym 3 times a week. I'm doing ran 5 miles. Yesterday I wrote an article and ran 5 miles. This is on holiday. But if I was you, I'd have written the article, run 5 miles, read for 15 minutes in the morning, 3 other 15-minute chunks, plus novels, memorizing Bible, 6 poems memorized.
I don't memorize poems. Although I did go through a phase of doing that.
I've got a few bits of Shelley memorized and Larkin, but not much else. But this is incredible. I'm learning from this, though. I might do the 15 minutes thing.
It's just something I've come up with, which I found. The reason I started doing it in that sort of specific way is because I was reading about this evangelical guy in America, who says that he reads, what did he say, like 150 books a year or something like that. I think it was 150, and I thought, well, that's quite a lot of books. And he's like he's a very sort of he's a high profile evangelical celebrity. His name's John Mark Comer. Read one of his books called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. which is a good book, by the way, but it's very sort of American. But anyway, he said he reads 150 books. I thought, gosh, like, how do you do that when you're, so busy? He's got like 3 kids and stuff, very, very busy, very high profile. And I sort of did some sums, and I can't actually remember what the sums are, but I basically worked out that in order to do that, I think you'd have to read for like 2 hours a day. And I thought, well, yeah, 2 hours a day is quite a long time to be reading, but actually to read 150 books in a year, 2 hours a day doesn't actually seem that much. It's kind of doable. So I thought, what would happen if I timed myself to read for a minimum of an hour a day? And you do actually get through loads. Also 15 minutes. This is the other thing about the subjective sense of time. When you put a timer on your phone, reading or anything else, I mean, you don't have to use a phone, you can use anything, but, and you don't look at it, you put it aside, and then you do your task. It feels like the 15 minutes is going to be up a long time before the 15 minutes actually is up. And I think the reason for that is because, well, I mean, obviously it will depend on one's mindset, but I think certainly for me, my subjective sense of time is that it's moving a lot quicker than it actually is. And a lot of the time you've got more time than you actually think, but it's just, there's something internally which is kind of rushing you. Do you know what I mean? So after 7-8 minutes, you think, oh, that must be 15 minutes. And then it's like the timer just doesn't go off for ages.
Interesting. Yeah, like a watch pot or like a meditation is a lot like that. Yeah, very interesting. Hope it's interesting to listen. I mean, I'm very interested in it. Like I say, I was managing over 100 back in the day novels, so it can be done. What your man there was doing, but now I'm doing audiobooks all the time, so they're constantly on. But whether I'm always taking it in or not is questionable. I'm definitely sometimes taking it in, and then sometimes I'm not, and I'm asleep or whatever. So I'm doing a lot of audiobooks. My rule is fiction has to be on the page, and it has to be paper really, and an audiobook can be information can just be audio. But it's still better if it's not audio, but it's doable for audio. But where I'm way behind is I've got to speak at some event. I can't really talk about it, but I've got to speak at an event with some hard hitting right wing intellectual people who are just, it's actually terrifying for me. I'm not used to being terrified about, not being smart enough, but I really am for this. And I've got to catch up on philosophy, political science, history. It's basically impossible. I've had no education because I went to a state school. And somehow I've got to catch up. Fiction is my area of expertise, but it doesn't really come up. It's not useful they kind of laugh at it in the culture wars. I've read every novel by Thomas Bernard. That's not going to help me. So, I know everything about postmodern American fiction. That's never helped me. So I've read the wrong things. Now I've got to go and read it. And where I struggle is these dense theoretical things that just don't stick in my mind. Whereas fiction, I've always got a lot better with.
It's a different kind of sensibility that fiction gives you. I think that fiction gives you. I mean, it's been proven in many different ways that fiction gives you an ability to empathize with people and to understand other people, to understand other cultures. Generally speaking, to be more sympathetic and empathetic than you would be otherwise, because you're literally imagining yourself in somebody else's position. You're seeing somebody else's perspective. All right, these people are often imagined characters, or they're historical characters, fictionalized historical characters, or whatever it might be. But it is actually developing you as a person. And I do think that about not that I want to put people down, but like if people don't read novels, I often think that they lack a kind of empathy or a perspective that they could gain through reading novels. Not to say that people don't have a natural empathy, but it is. I think reading novels is like a kind of empathy machine, really. So it does have that. And of course, you can.
Keir Starmer has to start reading some novels just to bring it full circle. Then he might have some empathy for the British people.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think he reads novels? I mean, I don't.
No, he just reads like about prosecuting people, really boring legal texts that he just takes them all in because he's so boring. And he's like, how do we prosecute more people? And he's just reading it like a machine. Just absolute scum.
That's the vibe. That's the vibe I get with somebody like Starmer. It would be a similar kind of vibe with somebody like Sunak. It would be hard to sort of imagine these people or any of them, any of these spots in the. But then there are other Tories. I mean, we've had Danny Kruger on this podcast. I think Danny Kruger reads novels. He certainly reads intellectual books, philosophy and theology. It's very impressive, actually.
I had David Frost on again the other day. I'm sure he does. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm sure obviously Boris, whatever his faults, was big reader and not on the classics and stuff. I shouldn't probably call people scum on a Christian podcast. I just said about Starmer. I'm constantly having to apologize on this podcast because in case I go too far. By the way, I just also hate to boss the podcast. We've got 5 minutes. I'm worried.
it's fine.
Have we got through all the questions?
There are still some more questions, but I sort of feel like we've done the kind of general kind of, they were in those kind of areas that we've covered. So I think that's kind of okay. So yeah, I think we've kind of covered everything we want to cover so far. And I don't know, is there anything else we should talk about in these last 5 minutes? Is there any burning issues that you want to touch on or pick up on or anything like that?
Well, I think people should go to nickdixon.net. That's the main thing, because this is going to be a 5-minute promotion. No, just because that's my website where I'm putting everything out these days, and I'm doing like reaction things where they're not. I keep wanting to say videos. So far, they're only audio, where I react to like Trump's assassination the next day or the riot, and I just speak on my own, and they're surprisingly popular. And
you know what, Nick? I found really like doing monologues on Irreverend. When Daniel and Tom aren't present, I sometimes do a monologue, and I actually really, really enjoy it. Just the freedom of being able to just speak my mind for, like, I did one for over an hour the other day. And
I did an hour. It feels a bit weird in my house, and my voice, I don't project my voice well. But other than that, because I'm talking on my own, and I'm not talking properly like I talk to you now. I'm kind of like mumbling it. Other than that, that's my own shyness. But other than that, it is good. Yeah, I didn't think I could do it, but I can actually I wasn't sure if I could do it for an hour, but it turns out I can. People like them.
They're very good. I've almost listened to all of the second one, but yeah, I think they're excellent.
Oh, thank you. I mean, some of it might be stuff I've said again today, but in general, I'm doing those reactions. I'm going to do more topical episodes, and I'm going to try and do more guest episodes. I've had some great guests recently, like Steve Edgington was brilliant. Lord Frost, of course, was brilliant. Loads of other guests, and that's on the current thing. But I'm going to try and do a topical episode a week, a guest, maybe not every week, it might not be realistic, and a reaction every week. So I don't know if I've got to work out how to do it, or I've got to be like you, like 15-minute chunks. So please go to nickdixon.net and subscribe. And I just want to say that quickly. Now we've got 3 minutes. Is there anything you want to address, Jamie? Because you're also because if I put this out on mine, you should also send people to your stuff.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, well, I'm the host of this podcast with Tom and Daniel. We're basically 3 Church of England vicars, and I don't really think that anything we sort of say or think is actually that radical. I just think we represent what has been the kind of would be the sort of mainstream Anglican
so in the 17th century
Christian position on things. And we try and as we've done in this episode, we try and apply that. And maybe we haven't talked about the Christian faith too much in this episode, but we try and apply the Christian faith we try and apply the Christian worldview to current events. So that's what our podcast is, Irreverend Faith and Current Affairs. We are one of the most popular Christian podcasts in the UK. Our podcasts always go to, well, I don't say always, a lot of the time they go to number one, in terms of the charts. So we do have a good listenership, which obviously it's nice for us, but it's also encouraging to know that this podcast gets a higher audience than, something like the Church Times, which is very sort of establishmenty or whatever it might be. There's a lot of, as somebody like David Frost would say, in an analogous area, there's a lot of appetite for these kind of opinions if people are willing to put them out there, and if they're able to articulate them with any degree of competence. So that's what the podcast is. I also have a blog. My blog is called Good Things, jamiefranklin.substack.com, isn't it? The Substack. And I try and write about things which are not really political or stressful in any way. A lot of these things we've been talking about here, about like my habits and things like that, I write about on my blog, things about the spiritual life, devotional stuff and things like that. And I'm also a vicar at a church called Holy Trinity Winchester, which is an Anglo-Catholic church in Winchester. I'm the priest in charge. And if anyone lives around Winchester or is looking for a church, please come and visit our services at 10:30 a.m. We've got a fantastic website, great website designed by great people. holytrinitywinchester.co.uk. Just check that's right, because sometimes I get that wrong. Yeah, that's right. Go to our website for all the details. But that's me.
All right, brilliant. So we'll release it on both things. And I just wanted to do a blanket apology to the Irreverend side of things, where, it wasn't that Christian today. I don't know if anything or everything I said was Christian at all, because it was quite angry and kind of, it was angry and political. So I don't know. Well,
let me just, for a final thing for me to say, I was speaking to an older colleague about this, and, what do we say from a kind of Christian perspective, an older priest? And he said, we're being lied to about almost everything. this is precluding people from living life in its fullness, which is really what we're about as Christians in the Christian church. And therefore, we have to speak the truth and bring the truth to people's attention as far as we're able to do so. So I do think there's a Christian mandate for doing these things. One doesn't have to be constantly relating them to explicitly, scriptural or Christian ideas or whatever. I think it's broadly congruent with a Christian worldview to point out the truth, especially when we're being lied to and gaslighted so much. So maybe there's something there.
Yeah, I suppose it's to do with your conscience. So, when I look at our history, looking at the Reformation and all that era and the Civil War era, it's just people who are very concerned about their conscience and getting things right by God and doing what they believe is right. And they have different opinions on that, but it seems to be a large part of our history. So we seem to be very concerned with conscience in this country and explaining it and articulating it. And I see that tradition in England. So hopefully it's part of that tradition of like, no, this is wrong. Yeah, they are lying to us, as you say, and we want to tell the truth. Yeah, so maybe in a sense that is a Christian thing to do. That's my get out anyway for the 2 hours of ranting that I've done. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I think it was excellent. Nick, really enjoyed having you on. I hope your listeners enjoy the conversation as well, in terms of my contribution. And
I'm sure.
Let's do it again soon.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, mate.
All right, bye now.
Bye.